They called it the Long Silence. A winter so bitter, so long, that the rivers froze to their muddy bottoms and wolves came down from the mountains in starving packs, howling through the night like spirits lost in purgatory. It was in that cursed winter that Tsar Mikhail Alexeyevich, the God-anointed sovereign of Drevna, began his reign of terror. The bells of St. Varvara's cathedral tolled once, twice, and then fell quiet as the snow swallowed sound. The townspeople gathered in the square, breath pluming, eyes wide with hunger and dread. Their boots cracked over ice like glass, and frost clung to their lashes. In the center of the square stood a tall wooden stage newly built, crudely nailed, and already stained with dark blotches that were not ink. Tsar Mikhail stood at the top of it. He wore black fox fur, a long velvet coat lined in sable, and a golden chain around his neck from which a blood-red garnet hung like a living eye. His face, pale as moonlight, was gaunt, angular, and nearly beautiful save for his eyes. They were the color of thawing lake water, cold, shallow, and rimmed with a madness no priest dared speak of. A man who had once studied scripture in Novgorod said those eyes had not changed in 20 years. Others swore they never blinked. Below the stage, the condemned knelt in rows. 30 of them. Men, women, even a few trembling children, eyes bulging behind frost-bitten lashes. They were peasants, mostly. A few merchants. One was a monk with no tongue. They were sentenced to die not by blade or rope, no. That would be too merciful. The Tsar had chosen his new punishment to mark the beginning of a new order, the exile of ice to conspire against my reign, he announced, his voice clear as a struck bell, is to conspire against God. And God has no pity for traitors. No one moved. Even the wolves watching from the tree line stood still, hackles raised, breath fogging. Mikhail raised his gloved hand. Strip them. Guards in iron masks descended with whips and hooks, tearing wool and linen from bodies too weak to resist. Bare skin met snow. Cries rang out, raw and thin, swallowed by the wind. The monk, silent, wept. Mikhail smiled, barely. North, he said. To the ice march. The condemned were chained together at the ankles, collars locked around their necks. They would be marched 300 versts into the frozen wilderness beyond the Ural forests where no man returned. That night, the first of the exiles vanished into the blizzard. Far away in the crumbling manor house of the old boyar Dmitry Polzin, candles flickered under drafty beams. A letter lay open on his writing desk, sealed with the Tsar's black wax. Dmitry read it twice, then threw his goblet at the fire. He's lost his soul, he whispered to the cold stone floor. And now he means to take ours. His daughter, Yelena, watched from the shadowed doorway. She was 15, already tall and too solemn for her age. Her raven dark hair had been cut short in mourning after her mother's death last winter, and she wore the same grey tunic every day, though servants whispered that she had silk gowns in her chest. She stepped into the room. Father. Dmitry looked up, eyes hollow. You must not go to court, Papa, she said. He'll find a reason. He finds reasons now. He stood slowly, drawing a breath through clenched teeth. He's summoned every boyar. If I refuse, he'll send his iron-masked devils. You've seen what they do. Yelena's hands balled into fists. Then don't return, she whispered. He kissed her brow. If I don't, you'll be alone. The fire crackled. Outside, wolves howled again. 3 days later, Dmitry arrived at the White Citadel, the Tsar's fortress, a monstrous amalgamation of marble, obsidian, and ice. It sat on the edge of the river Styla, its towers piercing the sky like jagged spears. The hall of audiences was silent but for the low murmur of fearful courtiers. On the throne, Mikhail reclined, his garnet glinting in the torchlight. "Polzin," he said, without looking up from the scroll he was reading. "Loyalist of the old court. Warden of 3 provinces. And yet I hear whispers you've been storing grain." Dmitri stiffened. "My people are starving." The road's silence. The scroll dropped. "You will send half your stores to Drevna by sundown," Mikhail said, "and the other half to the barracks at Rusa. You and your household will fast 10 days. If I find even one morsel of hoarded wheat, you will join the ice march." Dmitri bowed low. "As you command." Dismissed. But as he turned to leave, a young courtier approached the Tsar's side. He wore the red sash of a royal informer and a wicked smile. "I must speak," the young man said. Mikhail gestured lazily. "The daughter of Polzin," the courtier said. "She writes letters to the widow of Bishop Orlov. Her words are treason." Dmitri froze. Mikhail's smile deepened. "Bring the letters. She signs them as your daughter, sovereign." The hall went still. Mikhail rose. "Insolence," he said softly. "At 15. Dmitri fell to his knees. "She's a child, she's a traitor." The Tsar looked down on him, and his voice turned cold as death. "She marches at dawn." Yelena did not cry when they came. She sat in the snow outside the manor, dressed in a threadbare shift, her face expressionless as the iron-masked guards chained her wrists. "Your father begged for your life," one of them whispered. "He fasts in the dungeons now." They dragged her through the courtyard as servants screamed. Horses neighed. Blood from a butchered deer steamed in the snow. In the distance, the sound of bells, not joyous, but tolling. As the gate shut behind her, Yelena looked up at the sky. No stars. Just darkness. And wind. At the edge of the ice march, the chained prisoners waited. Yelena was thrust into the line, between a gaunt old man with frostbitten toes and a woman who no longer spoke. The snow was waist deep. Ahead, the road narrowed into a white abyss. The guards rode behind, spears in hand. A whip cracked. They began to walk. By the 6th day, half had fallen. Their bodies were left for wolves or frozen into snowbanks like statues. Yelena's lips were blue. Her skin split from the cold. She had not spoken since the 2nd night, when the boy beside her had frozen stiff in his sleep. On the 7th day, they saw the black spire. At first, they thought it was a tree. Then they realized it was stone carved into a tower that jutted out of the icy cliffs like a fang. No one spoke. The guards said nothing, only pointed. That night, the wind screamed like a living thing. And at dawn, the door to the tower opened. A man stepped out. Not a guard. Not a prisoner. He wore a robe of midnight blue, and his face was hidden beneath a mask of white bone. He raised one hand. And the ice cracked beneath their feet. Yelena screamed, but too late. The ground opened. And they fell. Yelena landed hard, the wind knocked from her lungs, her body crashing against something cold and slick. Snow poured in after her, blinding, choking. She clawed her way up, coughing, trembling, and gasping, until she was on her hands and knees in a pit of pale blue ice. Around her, others groaned, those who had survived the fall. Some were already limp, limbs twisted unnaturally. One woman moaned once, then was silent. Chains rattled as bodies stirred in pain and fear. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered a prayer. Above them, the bone-masked figure stared down from the jagged opening. His eyes, or what should have been eyes, gleamed with something not quite human. The pit was not just a hole. It was a chamber, carved deep into the permafrost, with walls of glimmering blue that glowed faintly, as though the ice itself remembered light. The temperature was colder than anything Yelena had ever known. She could feel her bones ache. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Every breath she took stabbed her lungs. And still, the guards said nothing. Ropes were thrown down, not to pull the prisoners up, but to lower crates. The first cracked open upon impact frozen loaves of bread, a few dried fish, a chipped water cask. Just enough to let them live. Just enough to prolong what would come next. And then the ropes vanished. The pit was sealed. Darkness fell. Hours passed. Or days. Time had no meaning underground. The exiles huddled together for warmth. Some succumbed to madness. Others to despair. The man next to Yelena muttered to himself constantly a prayer, or a curse. A child wept until her voice vanished. Then she too was still. Yelena remained silent. Watching. The pit was deeper than she'd first thought. It tunneled down beneath the surface through slanted corridors of frost. The bone-masked man, whoever he was, had disappeared after the collapse, but they all felt watched. At times, shadows moved behind the translucent walls. Something old. Something, waiting. Yelena knew she was not imagining it. One morning, or what felt like morning, she was awakened by a distant scream. It echoed through the tunnels like a wind forced through a pipe, sharp and hollow. A few prisoners rushed toward the sound, ignoring the danger. They didn't return. That night, the food crates did not come. When the others cried out to the heavens, Yelena slipped away. Her shackles had rusted at the hinges from the moisture, and the weak iron links cracked when she forced them hard enough against the wall. No one stopped her. Most were too weak to stand. She found a narrow passage near the place where the scream had come from. It led down, steeply. She followed it in silence, pressing one hand to the icy wall to steady herself. Deeper. Colder. Until the light vanished entirely. She walked in blackness. Then a glow. Not sunlight. It pulsed faintly, like breath, green and blue, like a dying firefly. She turned a corner and gasped. The corridor opened into a chamber. Not natural. A cathedral carved into the ice. Pillars of frozen stone arched toward a ceiling lost in shadows. Along the walls, reliefs had been etched, crude, ancient symbols she didn't understand. Faces. Wings. Spindly limbs. A beast with a mouth of thorns. At the center of the chamber stood a massive altar, and on it, a figure chained in place. It was a man, or had once been. He was naked to the waist, his body pale and nearly translucent, like something preserved for centuries. His skin was marked with black runes that pulsed faintly. A metal crown, half frozen into his skull, circled his brow. He did not speak. But when Yelena stepped closer, his eyes opened. They were white. Blind. But alive. "You've come," he rasped. She recoiled. "Who are you?" "I was the first," he said, his voice dry as bone. "The first to be exiled. Long before your Tsar built his palace of cruelty." She stared. Her voice trembled. "What is this place?" "The tomb of the forgotten," he said. "A prison beneath a prison." He sends them here not just to die, but to be swallowed by what waits below. Yelena felt cold sweat break on her back. What waits? He turned his head. Slowly. Painfully. The thing that speaks to him. The thing in the ice. She took a step back. I don't understand, no. But you will. The chamber seemed to vibrate with that whisper. Then the walls began to hum. A low, resonant thrum that vibrated in her ribs. The frozen runes lit brighter. The chained man shuddered. He's listening now. Who? The Tsar, the man croaked. His soul is not his own. It was taken down here. When he was a boy. He came in secret, seeking power. Yelena's breath fogged, mouth open. That's not possible. He heard the voice. The old hunger. It promised him dominion. It taught him to build the pit. To feed it. And in return the man choked. Blood ran from the corners of his eyes. Yelena tried to step forward, but the ice cracked beneath her. A sound echoed, not a voice, but something deeper. A presence. You must run, the man whispered. The longer you stay, the more it sees. It knows now. Yelena turned, heart pounding, feet slipping on frost. She fled back through the corridor, the walls closing in. The whisper followed her. Not words. Just the promise of pain. When she returned to the main chamber, chaos had begun. Prisoners screamed. Some had clawed at their eyes. Others threw themselves against the walls. The ice glowed with faint runes. And standing in the center where the food crates used to drop was the bone-masked figure. He held a staff of black wood. From its tip, steam hissed as it touched the ground. The offering is ready, he said. 2 guards stepped forward, dragging a prisoner between them. Dmitry Polzin. Yelena's father. His face was bloodied. His eyes hollow. But he was alive. She ran forward, shouting his name. But the guards didn't even flinch. The masked man raised his staff. And the ground split open. A pit darker than anything yawned beneath her father's feet. He screamed once. And was gone. The masked man turned his head. Yelena met his gaze. And the mask split. Not open but apart. It peeled into 6 segments, revealing a face beneath that was not a face at all. It was ice. Clear. And inside it, something moved. Something, hungry. The mask closed again. We will speak soon, it whispered. Then he vanished. Yelena stood alone. Screaming. The echo of her father's scream haunted Yelena as she stumbled through the tunnels. Her lungs burned with cold, each breath ripping through her chest like broken glass. She clutched the rusted chains that had once bound her, dragging them behind her like the tails of some cursed animal. Every step forward was agony, her boots slipping on frost that glistened like polished bone. Somewhere behind her, the hum of the ice thrummed faint, persistent, alive. She dared not stop. To pause was to hear the whispers. It sees you. It hungers. You cannot hide. Yelena's mind wavered. She tried to picture her father, to call on his warmth, but the memory twisted into ice in her chest. The corridors curved unnaturally, a labyrinth that made no sense. Yet somehow, she knew instinctively that the tunnels led downward, toward the heart of the ice. She shivered, not only from the cold, but from dread. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time was meaningless in the tomb. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but fear gnawed deeper. She stumbled upon a chamber, Smaller than the cathedral she had seen before, but with walls carved into grotesque faces, mouths open in eternal silent screams. A pool of water, black and thin, reflected the ice above like a mirror of madness. Yelena bent to drink, her reflection fractured across the rippling surface. She recoiled as the water stirred, though there was no wind, no motion, and a voice whispered her name. Not in words, but in the shape of sound, bending her mind. Yelena. Her knees buckled. She vomited, the icy water burning her throat. And then she heard it, footsteps. Not human. Not guards. Something moving across ice that did not groan, that did not crack, yet carried the weight of 1,000 frozen screams. She hid behind a pillar, heart hammering, and watched as it emerged from the shadows. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its skin shimmered like the surface of a glacier, translucent and veined with black. Its eyes were hollowed cavities, dark as frozen night. And in its mouth, rows of jagged, crystalline teeth reflected the faint glow of the ice. It paused. Its head tilted, as though studying her, weighing her frailty. Then it vanished, sinking into the floor as though it were part of the ice itself. Yelena felt her knees give out. She could not escape what she now knew lurked beneath the ice. She pressed her back against the wall, shivering violently, teeth chattering. Her mind screamed for logic, for reason, but none came. And then she remembered the chained man. The first exile. His words, the old hunger, it promised him dominion, it sees now. It was not the Tsar who ruled here. Not truly. It was the hunger. And it was ancient. Older than Drevna, older than the mountains themselves. She moved again, guided by some instinct she did not understand. She came to a vast chamber, larger than any she had seen. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, lost in mist, and the floor was littered with the frozen corpses of those who had come before. Some were twisted grotesquely, limbs broken, eyes staring wide in silent horror. Others had been preserved whole, as if the ice had chosen to keep them alive in a state between life and death. And at the center of the room, upon a throne of jagged ice, sat the bone-masked figure. Or perhaps he was no longer masked. The ice had merged with him, swallowing half his body, fusing him into some terrifying hybrid of flesh and glacier. In his hands, he held a frozen scepter, and the runes carved into the throne pulsed with that same eerie, living light. He raised the scepter. A ripple passed through the chamber. The frozen corpses quivered. Some lifted their heads, their eyes hollow but filled with a malevolent awareness. Yelena tried to speak, but no sound emerged. Her throat had frozen. Her heart pounded so violently it seemed to split her chest. "Welcome, child of Polzin," the figure said, his voice a metallic rasp that seemed to come from the ice itself. "You have wandered far. Few survive to see this place. Fewer still, with your spirit intact." Her father's face flashed in her mind. She felt bile rise again. Where is my father?" she croaked. The ice figure tilted his head. "Do you truly wish to know? Or do you wish to remain in blissful ignorance?" Yelena's hands shook. "Tell me." The figure smiled, or what passed for a smile, a fracture in the frozen mask. "Your father has been offered to the hunger. His soul is being reshaped." The words hit her like a hammer. Her stomach twisted. Her knees gave way. "No, no." The figure's scepter struck the ice floor. A jagged crack split the chamber. From it, a light emerged, not warm, but cold, shining with a cruel intelligence. From the fissure, shadows poured upward, rising like black smoke that took shape. Human shapes, distorted and wrong. They screamed silently, reaching toward her, clawing with frozen hands. Yelena stumbled backward, slipping over bodies and broken ice. The hunger's minions surged forward, and she realized she could not outrun them. Then she saw something, a small, flickering alcove along the far wall. Inside, a torch burned, impossibly, its flame golden against the blue ice. She scrambled toward it, tearing through the corpses like a desperate animal. When she reached the alcove, she pressed herself into the shadows and caught her breath. The minions swirled past, drawn back toward the throne. Her fingers brushed the wall. Cold, yet beneath it, a cavity, a hidden tunnel, just wide enough for her to squeeze through. She crawled, inch by inch, dragging herself into darkness, her nails ripping on ice and stone. The passage twisted sharply downward. The sound of the minions faded, replaced by the low, vibrating hum of the hunger itself. It was a voice without words, a presence without form. She could feel it probing her mind, testing her fear, measuring her resolve. And then the tunnel opened into a chamber unlike any other. A forest of ice spires, each taller than the tallest cathedral, stretched into a ceiling lost in mist. The floor was slick, broken by frozen pools that reflected the spires like shattered mirrors. And at the center, suspended above a pit of black frost, was a cage, delicate, fragile-looking, yet impossible. Inside it, her father. Dmitri Polzin, alive, eyes wide, hands gripping the bars of the cage. His body was pale, frost-kissed, yet his chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. He was conscious. He could see her. He tried to call her name, but the sound froze in his throat. Yelena cried out, but the sound barely carried. The hunger stirred. From the shadows, a new figure emerged, taller, thinner, its limbs elongated and fractured like broken icicles. Its face was featureless, a smooth mask of black ice. It raised one hand, and the cage began to rise higher, suspended by invisible chains. Yelena's fingers found a sharp shard of ice. She slashed at the air, but it passed through the figure as though it were smoke. The hunger's presence deepened, filling the chamber with a suffocating weight. "You cannot touch him," it whispered. "And you cannot flee. All who enter the ice, belong to me." Yelena sank to her knees, desperation clutching her. She realized, with a cold clarity, that the hunger was not just a force. It was a judge. A devourer. It had chosen her father and it would choose her next. She had to act. But how? The ice above groaned. A storm seemed to gather within the chamber itself. The black spires trembled, and the hunger's minions reappeared, streaming down the icy forest like rivers of shadow. Yelena's mind raced. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to strike. She felt the shard of ice in her hand, small and fragile, and yet, perhaps it could be her weapon. Perhaps it could be her salvation. She looked up at the cage, at her father suspended above the abyss. Her heart pounded in her ears. And then she heard it, the low, rasping voice of the hunger, now clearer, speaking inside her mind, "Choose, child. Sacrifice, or join." Yelena's eyes widened. Her hands shook. Her jaw tightened. And with a scream that split the cold air, she hurled herself forward. The ice shard clattered against the cage, and the chains rattled violently. The hunger recoiled, its presence twisting with something like surprise. And then, with a deafening crack, part of the spire nearest her shattered, sending shards raining like deadly glass. The chamber tilted, the frozen ground shaking beneath her. And Yelena realized she had only begun to fight.